Good morning from Cape Town, South Africa, to all of you, my good friends from wherever you are listening. Again, apologies for the delay caused by a bad dose of laryngitis. You will probably still detect some wobbliness in this voice, but I'm determined to get it done today. So thank you for your patience and your prayers. So today we're going to tackle a subject that touches us all, which is the subject of what's up with nationalism? And what are the differences between nationalism, patriotism, nationhood, Zionism, Christian nationalism, etc.? Of course, the question of the last one, Christian nationalism, has been in the news recently. Perhaps you've followed a lot of the saga around Charlie Kirk and some of the commentaries around his death and the idea of Christian nationalism that he promoted and defended. But it's not just an American issue. Wherever you live, South Africa, the UK, the United States in general, where there are overlaps very often between faith and nationalisms. And so I want us to explore some of those differences today and then invite us to reflect on where we stand with regard to all of the above. So, first of all, just to say, any word which ends with the three letters ISM, ism, is a dangerous word. The reality is that when we put those three letters on the end of a word, what we are doing is we are taking it as an identity. We are saying, I am a nationalist, or I believe in nationalism. And an ism is just what it sounds like. It is an identification with something. It is a definition of myself in the context of that thing. And there are two dangers to that. The one being that you get branded with whatever that thing stands for, and second of all, that you can become guilty of a kind of idolatry when you are fanatically committed to one particular thing. So that just by way of introduction. But I want to talk about the few things that I've mentioned in order and then show some distinctions between them. The first one I mentioned is patriotism. At its heart, patriotism means a love for one's country, a love for the fatherland. Hence, it comes from the Latin word for father. It is not just simply an unthinking loyalty to that country or that fatherland, but a genuine heart affection, the kind of affection you feel when you see a familiar landscape or an old home, when you smell the air of home, when you hear the songs of your people, even when you hear their accents, when you celebrate their stories and their achievements, whether it's sporting, as we are so used to in South Africa, building our pride, our national pride around the achievements of our sports teams. It might be scientific, it might be cultural, celebration of all of these things. When you get into what we call in Afrikaans, gees of it, the spirit of it, it becomes a very stimulating thing. But again, there is a difference between patriotism and nationalism. And if you hold to the one, it doesn't mean that you're automatically the other. Nationalism means that the nation is the absolute good. It is the highest good. It uses language like my country, right or wrong. And it tends to draw very sharp lines between us and them. It is sometimes resentful and suspicious of outsiders, and also can tend to racism on the inside between those who are true, let's say, South Africans and those who are not, or those who are true Americans and those who are newcomers. So let's talk about nationalism versus nationhood. The Bible is actually very clear about nations. In Genesis chapter 10, verse 32, it says that after the flood, the clans of Noah's sons and their families spread out, and from these came all the nations. From these, the nations spread out over the earth. So families became clans, became tribes, and then ultimately became nations. This is borne out in Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 8, which says, when the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, when he divided all mankind, he set up boundaries for the peoples. And of course, in the New Testament, in Acts chapter 17, it says that God determined the appointed times of the nations and the boundaries of their habitation. And that this is something that seemingly is very strongly in the sovereign hand of God. So God is the inventor of nations and the creator of nationhood. Nationhood is about identity. It is not only about who I am, but it is who else is here. What binds us together? What language do we speak? What stories do we tell? What land do we hold sacred? Nationalism, on the other hand, is about ideology. What should we do because of who we are? How do we organize politically, structurally, socially? How do we defend ourselves? What are the rules of the road? What are the kind of rules of engagement overall in our social construct? Nationhood describes us. Nationalism puts prescriptions around that and tells us how we ought to be. So nationhood is a spirit and a feel. Nationalism is an ideology. And you can trace this through the development of all the nations, whether France, whether Japan, whether Kurdistan, whether, of course, Israel. Nationhood is about belonging. Nationalism is about behaving. And so in the subject that is the overall theme of these podcasts, which is why I stand with Israel and weep for Gaza, the clash is not over whether Jews and or Palestinians have nationhood. Of course they have nationhood. Both of them have nationhood. The struggle is about how two nationalisms can coexist on the same land, how two ideologies can coexist. So the nationalisms that have arisen, Zionism on the one hand, and what should we call it, caliphate restorationism on the other hand, are the things that divide two people who are sharing a landmass. And when that is further compounded by the fact that one of those people groups, or in this case, the putative government of the one group, namely Hamas, denies the right of existence of the other, that is, the Jews and Israel, then we have a kind of mutual exclusion zone. So maybe I should just say it here, and I will unpack more about this in a moment. But what I do have to say is that I believe that Palestine should be free, not free from the boundaries of the state which they were given to inhabit and to rule for themselves, but free from a terrorist group that has dominated them and become the spokesperson for a people on the basis of a nihilism against Israel as a state and the Jews as a people group. And so my prayers and my tears for Gaza is that they would be free. They would be free from the ideological, political, and even physical domination of this horrific ideology, and that therefore also there would no longer be a need for any kind of intervention by Israel as a government and as a defense force. So let's talk for a moment about two particular expressions of nationalism, the one being Christian nationalism and the other one being Zionism / Christian Zionism. So where did the idea of Christian or any kind of religiously dominated or directed nationalism arise? I have to, at this point, apologize for someone whose name I bear. My full name in the Greek language is Kostadinos, which is another way of pronouncing Constantine or Constantine. It was the Emperor Constantine who started the problem in the early 4th century when he became a Christian himself, and then with the Edict of Milan created the Roman Empire to be called the Holy Roman Empire. Christianity became the favored religion. He declared that every Roman citizen was henceforth born a Christian. If you were born within the Roman Empire, you were born a Christian. So this was not just nationalism, but imperialism in the name of Christ. He saw the Christian faith as the unifying ideological glue for the empire. The church gained political privilege and protection. Bishops were appointed into places of political influence and administrators alongside governors. Christian symbols like the cross and even things like the celebration of national holidays that corresponded with the Christian calendar became the exclusive things that the nation celebrated. And so when it moved on from there into other forms through the spread of the population, the fall of the Roman Empire, Christianity continued to be the foundation and the mechanism of shaping of the Christian nations and states that were developing. The features of Christian nationalism in general are that faith and state are fused and even confused. So Christianity is not just a personal or communal faith, but it becomes the backbone of the state and the nation. It also sacralizes nationhood or belonging, the belief that the nation itself has a divine destiny or calling. Political power is seen as something that is appointed by God, and therefore the policies of that ruler become seen as the the same as the religion that put that ruler there in the first place. And so other groups are excluded, not only between Christians and other religions, but within Christianity, the different denominations, whether Protestant or Catholic. You're probably all aware of the many times that religious wars have been fought between so-called Christians on both sides of those types of divides. In the medieval era, Christendom developed, and then the Reformation became another sword of division between people, so that Scandinavian Christianity in the Germanic nations, in France, and ultimately in the United Kingdom, all became divided over which religion did the ruler adhere to. In brief, Christian nationalism has some positive outcomes. First of all, it in the day provided an ethical foundation, justice, dignity of life, care for people, charity. It created shared values and identity in the so-called Christian West. It had many outcomes for things like the abolition of slavery, of the restoration of human rights and codification of human rights and social justice. The negative side of this, on the other hand, was that it marginalized and excluded people who were not necessarily of the same kind of Christianity, or indeed Jews, Muslims, atheists, etc., were excluded in the name of Christ from something, from being seen as true citizens. It created a loyalty division, idolatry of the nation, and loyalty to Christ being identical to loyalty to state. And the problem for the church was that evangelism ended. Church and state got so closely aligned that the church no longer spoke with a prophetic voice at a prophetic distance. And so it gives Christ a bad name. And so for me, I've often told people I refuse to have one of those holy fish on the back of my car, somewhat one friend of mine called a holy mackerel. I refuse to have the fish on the back of my car because sometimes I make mistakes in the way I drive, and I don't want Jesus to become identified with my bad driving. But we can take that into many, many areas of life, and the way a teacher treats you at school, if you're in a Christian national education system, can often give Jesus a bad name. And so it also reduces the power of witness and makes people complacent in thinking that if I live in a Christian country, I must be a Christian without having any real relationship with Christ. So overall, let's just say it like this. There is no such thing as a Christian nation. Therefore, Christian nationalism is an oxymoron. And we are better when we don't have power, and we are better placed for being a credible witness to the gospel and God's standards when we have that kind of critical distance. So let's turn to Zionism. I have discovered in research, through the research, that there are no less than 11 different forms of Zionism. They're called by different names. Theodor Herzl, I mentioned to you in, I think, the first podcast, who believed that he stood for political Zionism, which was simply that the Jews require a sovereign state of their own as a political necessity, and that was his response to the anti-Semitism, the pogroms that were going on around the time. Practical Zionism was the thing that brought about the Aliyah, or the Aliyot, that we also spoke about earlier. And it focused on bringing the Jewish people back to Palestine and settling in Zion. Labor or socialist Zionism, led by people like David Ben-Gurion, tied the idea of Zionism to socialist ideals, bringing a just society through collective labor. The kibbutzim and the moshavim became their target, their goal. Then there was revisionist Zionism, which was a militant nationalist vision calling for sovereignty on both sides of the Jordan River and emphasizing strength and security and assertive diplomacy. While many Orthodox Jewish people who live in Israel rejected Zionism because they said it was not valid until the Messiah came, there were religious Zionists as well who took the return to Zion as part of God's divine plan. And so the destiny of Israel was part of their entering into God's covenantal promises. Cultural Zionism focused on things like language, culture, arts as the heart of Jewish life, and it emphasized spiritual and cultural renewal over the politics of it. Then, of course, there is Messianic Zionism, the return to the land where it being tied directly to Messianic expectation. For Jews, what this meant was a step toward redemption. And of course, Christians have connected with that by understanding that the coming of the Messiah, the fulfillment of prophecy, and the second coming of Christ are connected with the acting out of Zionism. The worst form of Zionism probably is exclusionist Zionism, which sees Israel as primarily or exclusively for Jews, with little or no place for Arabs or non-Jews, and the emphasis was on demographic security. The form of Zionism that was enacted in 1948, however, was called civic Zionism, which sees Israel as the homeland for the Jewish people and a state offering rights to not only Jews but to minorities as well. This also is expressed in the moderate Zionism of Yitzhak Rabin and Shimon Peres, who sought Jewish sovereignty while allowing for compromise and peace, not only for non-Jews inside Israel, but for peace and compromise with Palestinians. And they were the people who led Israel into the Oslo peace process. The new historians of Israel, who call themselves post-Zionists, are people who believe that we no longer need, or that Jewish people no longer need, a Jewish ethno-national state, but what they need is a more open-hearted, open-minded view of a binational model, a two-state solution, but without one group being the ruling group in the nation itself, in the big piece of land that is called Israel itself. Christian Zionism then becomes a kind of combination of these two ideas, Christian nationalism and Zionism. And so it says that the existence of Israel, and therefore also very often all the actions of Israel's government need to be supported by Christians because it is the way in which we usher in the coming of the Messiah, is that we have peace in the land of Israel, that the land of Israel exists, that it is peaceful, harmonious, that the people are safe so that they may hear the good news. But unfortunately, the way that it is done is that it only speaks in terms of support. It does not have any critical distance to be able to also prophesy, to be able to also speak truth to power, to be able to critique the actions of whether the national government, whether the IDF, or any other expressions of power, that it is my Israel right or wrong, my nation right or wrong, and that I do this in the name of the Lord. And therefore, again, the threat, the danger, that by our love for the people and nation of Israel, we actually give Jesus a bad name. So in conclusion, allow me to give you a couple of suggestions about some do's and don'ts regarding our participation as hopefully people of peace in the midst of a terrible, terrible war. So the first point I'd like to make is don't expect any people group, any nation, any government to be Christian. Individuals are Christians. Nations, governments, political parties, ideologies are not. This is equally true whether you are for it or against it. Don't co-opt Jesus onto your political party committee. Don't, on the other hand, blame political leaders because they don't want to uphold the teachings of the Sermon on the Mount. I've heard people saying Israel is violating the commandments of Jesus, who said, if you get smitten on the one cheek, turn the other also. So they shouldn't have retaliated. That is just silly. That is nonsense. Nations are responsible to defend themselves and uphold their borders. They are not responsible to just roll over and die when they are attacked. Don't be one-sided about human rights. And so, for example, if you never condemned October the 7th, 2023, please be cautious in condemning any military action that is seeking to retrieve the hostages and to eliminate Hamas and its demonic agenda. Don't insist on the rights of existence of a state whose stated purpose is to exterminate the other in this call for a two-state solution. And don't drink the Kool-Aid of the very obvious lies that are being circulated. The biggest one of which, of course, is the idea that Israel is committing genocide, something that our government began the court case about. Because the science of everything that's going on is that even if we believe the already exaggerated numbers that Hamas gives of the number of civilians who have died in this terrible war, which is about 30,000, maybe a maximum of 40,000 non-combatants. If Israel is seeking to exterminate the entire population of Palestinians, they must be the worst genocidists in history to have only been able to kill that many in 2 years. And so, as I said in a previous podcast, if words can mean anything, They mean nothing. I've also got friends who have, immediately it was published, the number of 680,000 was given, and of which 380,000 were alleged to be children who have died in the 2 years. And even Hamas doesn't claim that kind of number, and yet people were posting it liberally on Facebook and once again cursing Israel because they had killed that many people. The fact of the matter is that's a very obvious either lie or somebody put one too many zeros on the end of a report. And so don't believe those, and certainly don't disseminate them. And on the other side, don't believe that the only reason Israel stopped the food and aid distribution in Gaza was because Hamas had been stealing it. This was either obviously a deliberate strategy on someone's part, and that someone needs to be held to account, especially if it was accompanied with violence, as it seems in a few cases that were reported, it certainly was. That leader or those leaders are accountable for that, allowing that food distribution to stop, and therefore increasing the terrible tragedy of hunger and famine and even starvation in Gaza. So do check your sources before you believe something, and before you post things about it or repost things that you have not been made certain are true. And be very cautious, especially of saying something in the name of the Lord. Use disclaimer language. Use "as far as I'm aware," or use "this is my humble opinion." And certainly don't co-opt Jesus onto a political party committee. But do, please, pray. Pray for peace. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem and the peace of Gaza. Pray for the protection of children and innocents. Pray that common sense will prevail. Pray that humanity and the values that we all seek to uphold prevail in the midst of this awful conflict. Let us be those who speak the truth with grace and love, but at the same time do not wink at evil. Thank you for listening, and I will look forward to seeing you again, or having you on the next podcast, which I hope will come in the next 10 days. So, shalom to everyone. Until next time.